time, we'll go ahead and jump in. So thanks so much for joining this learning lab. As we shared, learning labs are just something that the SIG is putting on as a way to, share different learning opportunities, professional development opportunities, just ways to kind of share knowledge between our community. We're hoping to uplift voices from all different perspectives, from those working in high school, CBOs, those on the college side, just to really help, everyone who's a part of our community learn together. So you can expect a couple of these types of events, hopefully each, I was gonna say semester because I'm in the college side, but you can expect, several of these throughout the academic year. So we have 3 of them lined up for this fall, and I'll share a little more, but this is our very first one. So thank you for being here. So without further ado, we'll jump into making the most of the high school visit. And I want to take a minute just to kind of introduce our speakers. My photo is not actually on this slide, but my name is Megan Taylor, and I work as an academic advisor at the University of Michigan. Prior to that, I did work in our Office of Undergraduate Admissions, where I primarily worked with students in Northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula, which is all a very rural territory. I also grew up in a really small town myself, so just something I've had a heart for and loved kind of being connected to professionally. So I'm a member of the leadership team for the SIG as a whole. And with that, I'll go ahead and let our speakers introduce ourselves. So Lisa, if you want to kick us off.
Thanks, Megan. I'm Lisa Maselli, and I'm the Director of College Counseling. And my high school is the University of Illinois Laboratory High School. So in the state of Illinois, if you are south of I-80, you're often considered rural. So I'm really excited. I'm starting my 30th year, and I'm going to turn it over to Toby.
Hi, everybody. My name is Toby Bont Lyons. I went to the store and I bought Lyons, and I am the director of Upward Bound Espanola at Northern New Mexico College. So we are in Espanola in beautiful northern New Mexico, kind of in between Santa Fe and Taos, if anybody knows where that is. I'll pass it on to Kim.
Hi, y'all. My name is Kim Lord. I am Senior Associate Director of Admissions at Vassar College. I actually oversee our international admission and the island of Manhattan currently for my territories. But before joining Vassar, I did spend a decade on the high school side. And most noticeably, my last school was located in rural South Georgia. And so I got involved with the Rural and Small Town SIG while I was there, and have been really happy to continue to be a champion of the work since then. And like Megan, I am also on the leadership team for the Rural and Small Town SIG too. And I'll pass it on to Suzannah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Suzannah Bretz, she, her. I'm an assistant director here at the University of Pennsylvania. Penn is located in Philly, which is the opposite of a rural landscape. But I personally went to high school in a cornfield, and prior to working at Penn, I actually worked at Michigan with Megan, where I recruited in the thumb of Michigan, which is a very rural area. So I'm excited to still be able to be connected to that work and talk a little bit about it today. Give it back to Megan to give an intro for how things are going to go.
Thanks all for introducing yourselves. So as we can see, we have a really, wide range of speakers with us today. We're really excited. They have a lot of great info to share. Before we jump in there, just kind of a little overview of how the next hour or so will work. So we just wanted to start off with some kind of welcomes and introductions. And then we're going to have some time to share from both the admission side. So we'll have Suzannah and Kim kind of sharing from their perspectives. And then we'll also hear from the K-12 or the high school side. So Toby and Lisa will then share about their work in this area. We'll wrap up by kind of discussing the role of relationships and community partnerships. And of course, we'll include time for questions from you all as well. Also, just a few notes on navigating Zoom. So if you are new to Zoom webinars, this is a webinar. So that basically means you're not on video, you're not able to speak with us. So you don't have to worry about am I muted or anything like that. But you can use the chat to engage with us. If you see that chat at the bottom of your screen, you can use that to share thoughts with us. We are going to ask that you use the Q&A feature to submit any questions you may have. So I'll share more on how to do that later, but there's a little Q&A button at the bottom, and you can use that to submit your questions to the panelists. And also this session is being recorded, so all registrants will receive a recording of this presentation as well. So just a little housekeeping there, but we will go ahead and officially get started. So I'll hand it over to Kim now.
Thanks so much, Megan. So before we start really jumping into what the high school visit means, and again, sort of how we might view it and approach it from the perspective of both the admission side and the high school side. We did want to provide a really quick overview as to why this work matters, and to really think about what the rural and small town context looks like when we're talking about college access and student recruitment. And so as of right now, there are about 59 million people, which is roughly about 20% of the US, do live in rural areas. And another 29 million are identified as living in small towns as well. When we're thinking about our work in admission, 50% of all operating school districts are actually in rural America, and this includes over 10,000 both public and charter high schools too. So this is a huge range of institution and a range of students also that really share some of these identities and context. When we're thinking about access just to high school curriculum too, our rural students often do have less access to AP courses. So it is 47% at this point of rural districts are not actually able to offer any form of AP course. And that is a huge disparity from what we see in urban and suburban centers, where that's only 3 to 5% of those school districts that don't offer APs. That said, though, our rural students do actually graduate high school at a higher rate. So they do graduate about 80% after 4 years, which is higher than their urban suburban peers. But interestingly enough, do attend college at a lower rate, and do also tend to be overrepresented in both community colleges and less selective institutions. And so I'd like to share some of these stats just first off. Some of this, depending on your context, may not be surprising at all, but does really just sort of emphasize the importance of really being able to engage and promote college with these populations. And Megan, I'll have you switch to the next slide. Okay, so basics here too. Let's talk about what the high school visit is and why this really matters. And again, we're going to be starting off from the admission standpoint here. And so this is very much going to be focused on admission. So a high school visit, this is pretty straightforward, but it's when a college representative like myself, like Suzannah, comes into a high school to meet with students and also to be able to share information about their specific institution. On the flip side, and you'll also hear us use this terminology in this presentation, is the idea of a college visit, which is the opposite, when a student or a counselor is instead going onto a college campus to be able to learn about the institution in that way. So from a college standpoint, why does this matter? So first off, some basics. Of course, there is the exchange of information. And so this is the opportunity, again, as a college representative, to come in and be able to give updates, to be able to talk about your specific institution, why it might be a good fit, but likewise also to be able to learn from the counselor about some of the students who might be interested in engaging with your school, or perhaps just learning a little bit more about their context more generally. Also, this is a great opportunity, of course, to help students expand kind of the box of what their college options looks like. So really helping them think about what it means to go to college, what kind of criteria they might be looking for, and what kind of things that your school might offer. And then finally, from a really pragmatic standpoint too, a lot of the reasons why we're out there on the road is that we are really looking to expand and understand what leads we might have there and being able to attract students to our institution. I think this goes deeper though, and this is really what we want to get at during this presentation, is why does this really matter? And so as I mentioned, and why I started by framing what rural and small town context looks like, is that really by getting out and doing high school visits in these areas, we are reaching a historically underserved population. And that's something that's really important, particularly again, when we're thinking of the breadth of students who identify as rural and small town. Also, as admission officers, frankly speaking, we are experts in the field. We have such a broad and deep understanding of the higher education landscape, of the admission process from multiple different contexts for that matter. And so it is something that is part of our mission and hopefully is part of yours. And if it's not, please send your senior leadership to any of us to talk about it. But we really do get to go out and be experts in the field and being able to share what we know and contribute to the common good of creating college access across the country. Of course, so much of our work is about relationships too. And so really getting in and digging into community is allowing us to forge those connections with counselors, with community-based organizations. And certainly there's a lot of potential to be able to meet like-minded admission officers on the road and being able to partner with them in some respects too. And finally, I think the most important thing on here is that really, again, also by traveling, by going into a school, by meeting a student in their home environment, we're also learning how to be better advocates for rural students, really understanding that context, understanding what their high school looks like, what their curriculum looks like, what are the norms and values of a community. And that just at the end of the day, frankly, makes us that much better at our job and that much better at being able to promote college access more broadly.
So many admissions officers do high school visits as part of their responsibilities in the office. Some things to consider though, when you're talking about rural visits, because rural visits are a whole other ball game. So let's start with the timing of rural visits. When you're looking at when to book a visit at a school, you want to think about things like, are you going to an area where there might be high agricultural businesses? So maybe students might be out at the beginning of the day because they have to finish work at home or on the farm or in the dairy before they come to school. Also, as Kim pointed out, there's not a lot of AP access in some rural communities. So those students might be going to community colleges, which could be upwards of an hour away in order to take courses. So you'd want to talk with representatives of the school and find out, is there a portion of the day when a lot of the students that your institution might be recruiting won't be there? So you can make a strategic timing for when you want to do your visit. Next, let's talk about the calendar as a whole. As Kim was talking about, rural communities really are close-knit places. So if you're trying to compete with like a homecoming parade or a football game or a countywide event, you're not going to have great attendance at your visit or your fair. So definitely want to take into account what the calendar looks like. And we'll come back to talking about how knowing the calendar can actually help you make great connections within the community in just a few minutes. Other things that you might want to consider is, who do you even talk to set up a visit? Lisa and Toby are going to talk about the different structures at their school for setting up visits. I often found I recruit in Westchester, New York, also very different area. Most schools there are on rep visits or score. It was pretty easy to set up a visit. In contrast, when I was calling high schools in the thumb, I sometimes would talk to the high school counselor. I might talk to a secretary, a principal, or even one of the students who are part of the college access network after graduation. So many different people that you might need to talk to in order to set up that visit. You might also be asked to do a visit in a classroom, which again, we'll talk about in just a moment. And then lastly, something else you want to consider is, what is the type of visit? Again, usually when I was recruiting in more suburban and urban areas, it was a pretty standard visit, as we would call it. You know, you go to a room, there's students there waiting to hear just about your institution. You talk to them for a set amount of time and be done. But in the rural visit landscape, things can be very, very different. So let's talk about a couple different types of visits that you might be asked to do, and both the pros and the cons of these types. So first up, we have the classroom visit. Many times I would get asked, you know, could you come and talk to all of our seniors in a senior seminar? Because the graduating class of that school is 25 students. So it truly is one class. You get all the seniors at once. That can be great if you're looking to expand your institution's reach. You really want to share more and connect in that community. That can be a really great fit. Other times though, depending on your institution, it might not work as well. So maybe you're thinking about things more talking about the college going process and making connections in that way, you know, starting to build those relationships and then having one-on-one conversations after the class about your particular institution if a student's interested in it. The next type of visit you might be asked to do is a lunch visit. And the traditional lunch visit is when you might have a table in the cafeteria, and that can work really well. Again, you get students who might not have heard about your institution before. But if you're looking for more that traditional visit where you're able to sit with students and talk about your institution, one thing that I used to do is I would ask the counselors, could I eat lunch with the students who are interested in my institution? You know, maybe they would put us in a conference room or they give us a lunch table. And that allowed us to meet the scheduling needs of the school when lunch was the only time that visits could be done, but also allowed for those personal connections to start being built with those students in talking about my institution. And then what's probably the most different is virtual visits in the rural landscape. So let's talk about both virtual at the school and then virtual at home. So virtual in the school, both Megan and I had the shared experience in 2020 of being put on giant TVs in classrooms as we talked to students. Now, when I was doing visits with other schools, sometimes every student had their own computer they could log in on their own laptop. So I could do things in Zoom like polls, or there'd be a chat feature. That doesn't work as well when you're on a giant projector. So you have to adapt and think about, how am I going to connect with these groups of students? Sometimes it was raising their hands. I might have to have them come up to the computer and talk into it so I could hear them, or having someone there to facilitate the visit and type things in. On the flip side, when you're doing a virtual visit in the evening hours, that could be a really great way to connect with the other people who are involved in the college process, right? parents, family members. The thing though about internet access in rural areas is sometimes it's more sparse. So you can't assume that a student has internet access at home, even in 2022. So are you still going to be able to connect with those students if you are doing evening virtual visits? Something else to keep in mind is what time are you scheduling those virtual visits? My school district was 144 square miles. It took more than an hour to drive from one corner to the other corner. So you couldn't schedule a virtual visit at say 4 p.m. when the school day doesn't end until 3:30. So you have to keep in mind those commute times in rural communities when you're thinking about when do you want to schedule these visits.
Okay, Suzannah and I are going to piggyback now on some best practices from the college side when thinking about the high school visit. And so we split this up by sort of what to do ahead of time, who you can communicate within the school context, as well as some other areas of advice too. So first and foremost, and of course, anytime you're doing travel planning, you are of course doing research on the types of schools that you're going to, why you're going there, all those kinds of things. You're of course going to be having some kind of rationale that you're going to be giving to your supervisors. But we did want to dig a little bit deeper into that. And so first and foremost, going into a rural area, you want to be able to understand the values of that particular community. When we talk about rural and small towns, there is some consistency. Of course, there's going to be plenty of individual differences here too. But very often you're going to be looking at close-knit communities. You're going to be looking at places where there can be a lot of family interdependence. And so this might be multi-generational houses, or at least extended families who might be living in close proximity to each other. Family might be involved in same industry as well. You might see students who are working to contribute to the family livelihood. So all those things can certainly come into play. Likewise too, when you're looking at small communities, you're also going to be finding a strong sense of safety within those too. That's something that often comes up very heavily within the college process. And then because of what industry looks like often in rural and small towns, there's of course going to be a really strong appreciation for blue collar work too. And so knowing that that's something that you'll be wanting to talk about and engage with your students too. So we strongly encourage you to really think about, from the lens of your institution, how are you able to authentically talk about those community values? And so how are they going to be able, your students going to be able to find some of those things in like-minded ways on your campus? And that's going to be very, very important when you're thinking about how you tailor what you share with those students. Likewise too, of course, you're going to want to research the school before you walk in the doors. But a couple of specific things here. I strongly encourage you to explore where those students are typically attending college, because this can really give you a frame of reference for understanding what it is that students have most been exposed to in terms of college options so far, but also what kinds of processes they might be most familiar with. If most of their peers are going to the community college down the road, that's a really specific application process that's going to look very different than a highly selective institution, for example. Or if they're looking at the local agricultural college, which is something that was a very popular choice for my students in rural South Georgia, that has a very specific range of majors available to it versus a liberal arts college or a technical institute or something else. And so really being able to respond to that is going to be important as you're engaging with students. And then, as we've talked about a couple times already too, many rural communities are not going to have access to AP or IB, potentially even dual enrollment as well. And so really want to understand what the curricular options are within that high school before you walk in. And so that way you're able to speak specifically to what those students are engaging with, and also not using terminology that they might be unfamiliar with as well. And I'll turn it over to Suzannah.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, I had a checklist every time I went into a school in the thumb of, does your school offer physics? What's the highest level math? Do you offer a second year of a foreign language? Which in a lot of suburban areas, those things are all a given, but it might not be a given in that particular school. And so we want to make sure that you are speaking knowledgeably, so you're not the person up there saying, be sure to take this when it's not even offered at the school. Any admissions officer worth their salt should research their territory before they go there. But again, pulling out key things to look for in a rural territory. Think about major events, as we kind of talked about, not just those that are official events happening in the community, but even things like, when is hunting season? Because during hunting season, again, you're not going to be able to pull a large crowd together because people might be out and about. Also thinking about agriculture, in the area. I, in the summer, got to enjoy the experience of sugar beet farming. Sugar beets are another way in which sugar is farmed in addition to sugar canes. And so every October for 2 weeks, depending on when the weather was best, I would encounter giant trucks full of sugar beets. That added additional time as I was driving around. It also meant that sometimes I was missing students because, again, they were helping out in the local community. And also, what can you connect to within the community? What are the community highlights? You know, thinking about things like sports teams can often be really big in rural communities. Do you know what the school mascot is? Do you know if they won their big game the previous week? How can you start making those connections when you walk in the door so that you sound like an intelligent person who understands the community there? We also strongly encourage you to research the local pronunciations. Toby was telling us the other day when we were preparing for this session about having counselors who come to his school and not being able to pronounce Española. It's important to know these things when you're going into a community because you really only get one shot to make that first impression, right? And you want students to be able to connect with you from the get-go. The other thing sometimes people learn the hard way is that cell service can be scarce in rural communities. So you want to make sure that you can download a map in advance. I highly recommend Google Maps. They have the feature with offline maps. Will track where you're going. You can download a whole region. But if your map fails, when in doubt, people are really nice. You can certainly ask for directions or just keep in mind, most things are a grid. So if you miss your street, just go one further. It's usually about a mile and turn, and you'll just be 1 mile off from where you need to go. Let's go to the next slide and give some more tips.
Okay, and I know we had a question about this also that we can address more fully later, but I think this will at least start us here, is who can you engage with while you are on the ground in the school? And so anytime you're walking into the school, of course, you're first and foremost want to be connecting with juniors and seniors, but also this is an opportunity to be able to serve as an expert and to be able to connect with more constituents, if possible, if that's an option, if time allows. And so, of course, you want to be able to talk with counselors in many rural and small communities. And this is true, but broadly also, I mean, school counselors have such a wide load of duties that they are responsible for. And so oftentimes college counseling might just be a tiny, tiny piece of that, or they might not have had a ton of training in that particular area. And so this is an opportunity, again, for you to be able to connect with a counselor, to learn from them, but also to be able to share some wisdom as well. And same thing can go with teachers and administration too, because in small communities, you're going to find lots of folks who might be involved certainly in the life of a student, who might be there, who are imparting advice as well. And so perhaps being able to connect with those folks and other constituents can be super helpful. And I will say this as well, when I worked in South Georgia, I used to regularly ask admission officers coming in to meet with other folks on campus. And so I would have them come in and speak with our junior English teachers as they were gearing up for essay writing in the spring. I had a couple times I had them sit down with our upper school director to really help educate him about options outside of Georgia itself. And so again, there's really great opportunities for some synergy there that are beyond just connecting with the juniors and seniors. And also too, I think it's great if you're able to, if this is something that the school is able to facilitate, is to meet with younger students. So when I worked in South Georgia too, I actually taught an 8th grade class that was about transitioning to high school. And so I loved to bring in college reps into my 8th grade class and have them talk with students about what it meant to go to college. And so it wasn't necessarily about a specific institution, but it was just a great opportunity to start to be able to build that college going culture, even with my 8th grade students. And as always too, don't forget about the parents. And so if you are particularly at a fair or thinking about a virtual visit, what are the ways that you're able to really pull in that parent population? And keeping in mind, of course, the frame of reference that the parents might have in rural and small town, you're going to find a lot of first generation students, or again, parents who might have gone through community college or local or regional institutions. And so sort of understanding how they might be viewing higher education and how they might be sharing some of that ideas and ideology with their students is really helpful too, in being able to kind of broaden some of those perspectives as well.
And then in terms of what the visit can entail, again, you focus on greater issues in admission that aren't just specific to your institution, like we've kind of talked a little bit about today. You could also do targeted sessions on topical issues. We got a question in the chat asking, in the Q&A, asking us who determines the type of visit. It's usually the high school, but as an admissions officer, you could certainly make suggestions, or say, for example, with the lunch visit, that I would go and ask, could we tweak the lunch visit style a little bit? It's truly a partnership in these communities and with all admissions officers across the world, no matter where you're recruiting. But the thing, I think, if we want to make the biggest takeaway from our portion, is Kim and I want to focus on building relationships with the school and the community. It's really helpful when it's the same admissions officer coming back year after year, because you really get to know the people there. You get to build trust. One of the other ways you can build trust is by sharing parts of your background where appropriate. So if you're a first generation college student, I often told students I went to high school in a cornfield. I would share that my father is a long distance trucker. I wouldn't share things that they might not connect with. And I also would take into account the community I'm walking into. Our institution that Megan and I worked at had a policy of all visits, you're supposed to wear a suit. Neither Megan nor I ever wore a suit into a rural school visit, because that can be alienating to students, right? So I always try to model my look more after their teachers, after the adults in their lives, knowing the community, knowing who you're recruiting with. That's what's most important here. And then other ways you can build relationships, and again, ways you could make suggestions for different things. Could you go and help with an application launch day? Could you help them get the Common App set up for every senior, or the coalition application? Could you do something called a junior jump, which is something that Lapeer High School, shout out to Julie Pecor, in Lapeer, Michigan does. So what they do is they bring in colleges from all over Michigan to meet with their juniors in May, and all the students sit through all the college sessions, and it's a really cool thing to be a part of. If you're the flagship institution in your state, can you commit to going to events so then other people have leverage to get their institutions to go to the event too? It's, you know, all about making those great relationships. And then FAFSA workshops. Oakland University, just outside of Detroit, they were really great about going around and helping students set up their FAFSA. Sometimes it was admissions officers, sometimes it was those financial aid counterparts. So again, how can you bring in other aspects of the university to help the local community and really forge those relationships across the board? We've talked a lot about the college side of things. Let's pass it off to the high school side of things. Lisa and Toby talked a little bit about how it works on their end.
Thanks, Suzannah. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Maselli, and I'll be going kind of quickly through some things and turning it over to Toby, but we welcome any personal emails to us as well if you want us to go deeper and talk with you about the climate and the culture of your high school. So first and foremost, I always say it's important for you to define what your college rep visit program and the goals are of your high school. Suzannah and Kim talked a lot about the culture, and that is so important for you as a counselor to also not only embrace that, but sometimes even push back with teachers and administration if you feel like there are some barriers that we'll talk about that sometimes exist with hosting reps. I always say admissions professionals are kind of the core and the crux of why we want them to come into our building, so that we can expand knowledge of college options to our students. But we also want to focus as high school counselors on the quality of the visit and not the quantity. Oftentimes, because of where I'm located, we have family that have relatives that live up in Chicago, and it becomes a comparison contest of why do we only have 30 reps the whole year, but a school up in Chicago has 30 reps a week. And oftentimes we have to educate parents about what the goal of the visits are, and for them to understand that, again, it's not about quantity, it's about how we use those to actually work with our students in our developmental counseling program. So the culture and the climate of a school, in my school in particular, I have 100% that are college bound to 4-year and often ask for gap years, and we don't excuse kids from class. So since I have to work within that barrier of a school like mine that says, if you really want to go to college, you should be in class, therefore we don't give you passes to visit college reps. The question is, how do I get them to want to come to these when they could be playing Uno with their friends or eating lunch and not necessarily wanting to engage deeply with a rep? So the one thing that we have to do eventually is to talk about the goals of these visits, which I'll get to. But it is important for us to always talk as a team in our counseling center about how we want to treat these VIP visitors that do put us on their radar and do want to come and visit. So a priority that we have at our school is that someone will always connect with a visiting college rep, whether it's a counselor, whether it's a support staff member, whether we potentially even have a student ambassador who might be actually meeting and greeting a rep. But definitely we want the visitors who actually put us on their travel visit to know that we appreciate them, that we celebrate them, and we want to treat our reps like VIPs. And we want to help students see that the relationship is there and that college representatives are not necessarily always the bad people on the other side of the desk trying to make hard decisions, right? So definitely, if you can, I would encourage you to talk with your entire department. You may be sitting there thinking, I'm one counselor and I also have to jump from school to school. So maybe you have to think about how you want to actually maybe come up with a way to use students as ambassadors, or even alert your administration if you have visitors coming in so that they can help greet and welcome. I even talk with our support staff who has to buzz people in so that they understand what the importance is of walking them down to our office and having the reps that come feel celebrated and welcomed into our building. Okay. Now, when it comes to the intended audience for our visits, we definitely are aiming these visits towards juniors and seniors, but we always tell the youngest students in our building that it's never too early for them to be a sponge, to come and absorb information, to learn, to attend. And we want them to know that the representatives are there to, potentially talk in terminology that they may not necessarily know when it comes to them talking about a Common App, Coalition App, what are different admissions deadlines. So one of the things that I have been involved in the last 5 years is I have been actually team teaching in health class to kind of do a life skills module to start planting seeds for the 9th graders on terminology of college admissions. What does holistic review mean? And when you see a representative that's listed on our calendar or is in our building, what does it mean to be a younger student to walk into that room? And what can you learn? And how can you maybe walk in with another student if it feels intimidating to you? So we definitely look at the goal of these programs as being a teachable moment for any interested student who wants to possibly attend these events. We also tell our faculty very broadly and celebratorily who is coming to visit, because our school is a selective admissions school for them to be admitted to. We have lots of faculty who have children that are high school age who don't attend our school. So we often see faculty that come to learn about college reps so they can help their own children navigate the process, or they want to learn about the importance of letters of recommendation when an admissions officer talks about holistic review. So definitely tell your teachers who's coming, celebrate who you have in the building, and invite them to come to hear about the admissions process as well. And then again, as the admissions professionals on our panel shared, include the parents if possible. Definitely let them know who's coming in the building, let them know what the purpose of the visits are, and encourage them if they can. I always tell families, if they happen to be near our building and we have an in-person visit, they are welcome to buzz in and join the talk. And definitely when I get into kind of hosting visits and what this hybrid model might mean, with some reps still coming in a virtual format, you can always share those links with parents and encourage them to log on and join the conversation as well. One thing I want to highlight briefly before I flip to my next slide is the goals of the visit, again, are so important for you to know for your school. So a few that I have in particular are to expose students to a variety of schools and to increase our rep visits with intention. And what I mean by that is, it's not necessarily how many reps do we have, so that sometimes I can appease a family who often wonders, does the college rep know about Uni High? Why aren't they coming here, but they're going up to this school? There's a lot of those comparisons that can often happen. And I always explain to students that, and to families, that it isn't about how many are in your building, but how students learn to engage in them to become better consumers of the college admissions process. So a goal of our visits is to teach students how to dig deep when they're learning about a school. It's about educating them about schools that are awesome in our community that they may not have considered. And it's about connecting our students to even young alumni. So one of the things that I teach them when they go to visits is it's not just about always connecting with these amazing admissions professionals, but if by chance you have had students who have graduated from your high school who are now attending that college, how do you connect them together so that they feel like they have a personal connection with an older peer who has been navigating the admissions process and is now attending, for them to actually round out information they collected to be a better consumer of college admissions information when they think about their fit. And then for proactive outreach, the two entities that I always want to say are important to think about when you want to grow your visit program is not only admissions counselors, because forging this relationship with each other on both sides of the desk is important, but don't overlook your high school friends. Again, for me, because of the state of Illinois and my IACAC association, I had so many friends who were located up in the Chicagoland area who would often say to their visiting reps, you know what? If you're not driving down I-57 South and stopping at the school, you're missing a great community of kids. And you're missing a great community of young scholars that are at the other high schools in town. And I can't tell you how many times an admissions officer reached out to me because my colleague in Chicago put my school on their radar, or definitely encouraged them to consider coming down. Same thing with me. I feel like a part of my responsibility is to also pick up that phone and to reach out to an admissions officer and say, you know what, we haven't had you here. I know your time is limited. I know gas is expensive, but is there a way that we can kind of figure out a way to maybe get you down to our region of the state of Illinois? And I'll often say, and you know what, I'll make it even more lucrative for you. You don't have to come and just see my school. I want to host you for a broader outreach so that if you do come, you can see the talented students that are in my entire community. And that's something Toby and I are going to talk about too, about how we can actually increase the engagement we have with others. And now I'm just going to jump to the next slide and briefly overview for you college rep visits. If you haven't been involved or logged on to this, it's free. I can tell you at my school, we've never had the budget to pay for anything. We're not on Naviance. We don't have any of those things that have a license fee. Everything with our budget has to be free. So Rep Visits is a free portal that you can create. You can set up how you want to do these visits. And I put in here, hybrid is here to stay, because I do offer still both in-person and hybrid, so that we can have visitors that actually can't necessarily make the drive still engage with us in a very vibrant way. But definitely, as you're thinking about how to host these wonderful admissions representatives that want to be a broader resource for you and do classroom presentations or be involved in one-on-ones with students in small lunches, which I loved hearing, think about, will your school allow you to interrupt class? If you do host it at lunch, which we do, how do you turn it into more of a brown bagger discussion and not something that it feels like the rep is sitting there as just kind of an add-on in the lunchroom, but it's more purposeful? What about homerooms? What about special periods that you might have? We have something called uni period that I will often tap into, which happens to be the slot you see on rep visits at 3:10. Those are after school, and we promote those heavily so students know there's an option for them to hear reps before they head off to sports practices, before they head off to theater practices. I am also open with the support of my administration to even do evening and weekend things if we feel that that will increase attendance. And again, whether or not you have students sign up or not is again a school policy. We don't have signups because it's lunchtime and students can opt into coming, but we definitely over promote. We do emails, we do flyers. If we have Kim coming to represent her institution and I have a list of uni grads who have gone to that school, I will even put the names of those students on the flyer to say, hey, come and see where your younger and older peers have gone, things of that nature. So we definitely believe in sharing as much as we can with our family community, promoting these, and increasing partnerships is something that Toby is going to talk about as well. And we're going to get back to that so that we can share with you some great ideas to extend and expand your access points with reps, even if you're piggybacking off of another institution in town. So thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Toby.
Great, thank you, Lisa, and hi, everybody. And just a little context that I think is important to consider and thinking about this is one thing I always think about thinking about rural communities is diversity within rural communities and among rural communities, right? Is a lot of people have a certain idea about what rural communities are. In the context I work in, we are a small town, right? That both the college and the high school are rural serving, though a lot of our students are coming from rural communities. But Northern New Mexico is majority Latinx and Native American, right? So much different cultural context and background than many rural communities. And that's just important to keep in mind as you go in. And some of the challenges we had setting this up is starting an Upward Bound program 5 years ago. We're a new program. Is there wasn't necessarily a college counseling infrastructure. There's wonderful counselors, but they didn't necessarily have the bandwidth to do college counseling and set up rep visits. Most of our students did not go to college, and most of those who do were going to in-state colleges, right? Very few. It was notable when a student went out of state. And I think tellingly, the visits we got from college reps were from in-state schools, right? Is when I started at our school, no out-of-state institutions were coming to visit our high school. And that being said, then nobody had heard of the Common App. The Common App was not something anybody even knew existed, right? And so having to kind of bootstrap a system and develop a system from scratch with limited resources is what a lot of rural high schools are going to have to do in terms of developing a high school visit. There's not going to be a culture in place around these visits or a system to manage them, or the relationships with reps and colleges to have them come visit us. So just three kind of general areas I would like everybody to think about. And the first one is to be creative and flexible. And this goes for colleges and for high schools, right? The timing and the location of these can vary, right? And that can go from game nights. We've done college visits at high school basketball games because that's where the community is going to be, right? And students are going to show up at clubs, in classrooms, right? Part of the challenge is finding the champion in your school who's going to help you get students there, right? And at some schools, that might be a counselor. At some schools, that might be a coach. That might be a teacher, right? We have teachers who would love to have a college visit. They're so few and far between at our school that a teacher is going to be excited, right? Knowing that a school from New York wants to come talk to our students is going to be an event and people are going to want to come to. And I think also just considering drive-bys, right? We've done a lot of visits that were on a rep's way from one high school they always go to another high school they always go to, and they had a little bit of time to come, and we figured out a way to make it worth their while, right? Audience-wise, another thing to consider is the size, right? Is what size is going to make it worth the rep's while and the college's while? And I think something to consider is small can be good, right? You may not always get a huge audience, and that can really make a difference. And some of the best visits we've ever had were really small. And I think also the class that you're visiting, right, in terms of freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, is important, right? If you're the only visit of the year and you're coming in October or November to visit seniors, right, and no other colleges visit, they haven't started thinking about out-of-state colleges or doing a Common App, that's probably too late, right? And so junior year might be a better time for a lot of schools, right? Even in terms of developing leads. And I think just considering that you might be the one visit, if you're a rep, is important, right? And same thing for the high schools is the content and the purpose then can change. We've all mentioned that just the informational session can be great, but also if you're the only one of the year, how much information a student can take in and understand may be limited. And I'm also a proponent of one of the best and most fruitful college visits I've ever had was a hangout, right? It happened by accident. It wasn't planned. A rep I met through somebody else called and said, something fell through. Can I come see students after school? We had some pizza. We literally called students. We got like 7 to come, and he just hung out. He didn't even present because nobody showed up at the right time. But 2 of those students went to his institution of the 8, right? They enrolled, they applied, they went out of state to his institution because it was like special, right? There was that special relationship. So I think an important thing for high schools to do is to leverage some other resources, right? What are the community partnerships that exist or could exist? Are there Gear Up programs? Are there TRIO programs? Are there local community colleges or regional comprehensives that part of their mission is to serve students in high schools that can help other colleges connect, right? And I think the biggest game changer for me has been regional networks. We have an established school with a wonderful counselor who's part of the leadership of the NACAC SIG, Maddie Bada, who works at Santa Fe Prep, and they have an established system. And he has been wonderfully generous on introducing us to reps, on inviting us to their virtual visits, right? He's added us to their calendar. So whereas a rep from a college may not want to come, it may not be worth them doing a presentation for 6 of my students. 2 of them might be able to attend Santa Fe Preps, for instance, and that has really helped us build that culture. So being able to piggyback on things that exist and find the other schools that are having rep visits has really helped us. And that's all about taking the time and intention to build a culture and nurture relationships and create stakeholders. Kind of like Lisa mentioned, celebrating visits. You know, I think of us as hosting. When a rep comes to visit, like we're a host and an ambassador for our community and want to give them that experience. And I also want to find people within my school that can be part of that system. And then finally, I think just student pre-work and debrief, right? If college visits are not something that students are used to having, and haven't been around, especially if they're first gen students, right? They're not going to know how to engage in a college visit. So just putting them in front of a rep is not necessarily going to be a worthwhile use of time. So working with students and prepping them on how to do a college visit, right? And then also being able to debrief, like, what did you learn? What did you like about the school? Like, helping them make sense of the experience is really important on the high school side. All right, next slide. And then one of the things Lisa and I talked a lot about were, one of the challenges is, how do you make these visits more engaging? So just a couple of suggestions that I've had personal experience with that I have seen be really effective is, one, offering seminar topics, like we mentioned, right? Is visits that aren't just about the college, but some of the ones we've done is we've had one that's been really effective, because you can sneak in why you should choose your particular college, is how to choose a college. What's the difference between colleges, right? The college search in general. Of course, essay writing workshops, we've had reps volunteer their time to help even read student essays. And that relationship that's built has been so powerful. We also did one with Matt Ibata's help that was an activities list workshop where reps presented, and we had a few reps team up from different colleges and virtually talk about what do they look at in an activities list, and then had students be able to present theirs and get some feedback. And then, of course, I think it changed my life when I discovered case studies, and apparently case studies are something that lots of schools do, and it was not something that any of the schools I've worked with, it was part of the culture before. And so doing those admissions case studies has been wonderful. And the Davis, New Mexico Scholarship has developed some rural specific, not rural specific, first gen specific, with a rural influence within it, case studies. And then finally, just want to say, consider active learning strategies regardless of the content, right? Having the students do something, anything to engage with the material you're presenting would be very helpful. Oh yes, so a case study is three common app, the like examples that aren't real students that personify different students, and the students act as the admissions board or the admissions team, and they read the applications. So you learn how the students learn how to read applications, and then the reps lead them through deciding who gets admitted, waitlisted, and denied. And it's like a very powerful transformational experience, I think, for our students in terms of really understanding what is holistic admissions in particular. And then finally, for me, just, and we've said it again and again, is relationships and relational strategies make a difference, right? Asking students their names, finding a way for a rep to connect with the student, and as a high school trying to facilitate that makes a lot of difference, right? There's a lot of ideas and misinformation out there about what colleges are and who these reps are, right? Is like students can be very intimidated. So part of my job is like, to how do you help facilitate that and kind of demystify college, but also out-of-state college, right? That's a big challenge for us, is out-of-state colleges are seen as something different than our local home institutions. And with that, I will pass it on to Lisa.
Thanks, Toby. Just two things to highlight from this slide. An example for how we host visits is I will tell reps in the fall, sometimes they are very senior focused, talking about logistics of applying, deadlines, FAFSA, all that stuff. In the spring, with the vibrant amount of reps that are interested now in doing spring visits, I will say you can come, but you have to do it as a seminar. So what do you want to talk about? Right? How to make the most of a college visit, how to write your essay, how to fill out the activity chart. What does it mean when we talk about college fit? What is holistic admissions? And then I actually advertise spring visits to the juniors and younger kids that you will learn a piece of the holistic admissions puzzle, but then be exposed to a college who uses the last 10 or 15 minutes giving their elevator pitch regarding who they are, what their values are, and have them walk away with some good college information. So that's been a good strategy. And the other thing is, again, I can't tell you, at least at my school, the young alums are ambassadors to college admissions. So shout out to the colleges who have actually talked with students in rural areas and have said, hey, are you going home for winter break? If I gave you some materials, would you like to talk to your high school? Oh my gosh, our kids go to those. They love it. So I mean, literally, some colleges have even flown some of the kids home and paid their airfare to come and do a visit over spring break or do something on a break from their institution. I can tell you for students who are very close in a tight-knit community, that type of engagement with an alum is actually an ambassador to you as admissions professionals to get the word out about your institution. Very effective. And then panels are an example that I want to share. So if Megan can show the next slide, this actually highlights the last bullet points regarding partnership and also increasing parent engagement. Sometimes I'm a little strategic, again, with thinking of what are the goals for the values of our school in our larger community. And I will often put together something that is about, for instance, the upper right-hand corner, a seminar about college selection and your pre-med intention, and put together a panel of colleges so that the kids who are interested in medicine can come. And I will strategically sometimes invite colleges that I want the kids to think about, that oftentimes are not on their radar. And this way they can be exposed to schools that may not have snuck on their radar. Rhodes was intentional. Yes, they look at Vanderbilt. I want Rhodes to come, right? It's like, how can I put together a panel with an intention to meet the purpose of our school, to expand the repertoire of colleges and open this up to everyone in town? These things through our new, world of engaging people on Zoom and webinars has actually been wonderful for our community, because I share all of these programs with the 7 or 10 schools in our local community. On the left, just like Toby was giving shout outs to his local colleague who shares their Zooms, we share ours. That's an example of an email that gets sent out to all the high schools in town to say, if I'm hosting these reps, you're welcome to come. And then it's the same thing, right? U of I is literally, we are located on Engineering Quad. The U of I admissions office does things, and we open it up to all Champaign County high schools to not only be able to show that we want to do public engagement for everyone in town, but to also ease the burden of the admissions professionals. These road warriors don't necessarily need to hit every single high school if we can partner together. So that's the last tip I wanted to share too. It can be a win-win for everyone.
All right, great. Thank you so much, each of you, for sharing your tips. We are, just a few minutes shy of 2, but I want to go ahead and invite any questions for our last few minutes. So if you do have a question for one of our panelists, feel free to use that Q&A feature to submit any questions you have. You can also feel free to share any thoughts you have in the chat, like if there was, something you thought that was particularly useful or insightful or anything like that. If you'd just like to use the chat to engage with us, you're welcome to do that. So we will, hold these next few minutes for questions. And then if there are no questions, we can always wrap up right at 2. So I will just pause here and see if any questions come through. And I have fixed the chat, so you should now be able to actually use it. Email contact info of the presenters, yes. So we can maybe include this in our follow-up email, but for those panelists, if you're willing to share your email info, if you want to just put it in the chat, that might be an easy way. All right, here's a question from a counselor working in Southeastern Kentucky. Any tips for how to disengage from stereotypes about the city, address questions about safety for students in rural communities going to urban schools? What a great question.
Sure, I can talk a little bit about that. As someone who moved to Philadelphia 6 months ago, and it's definitely a large city compared to Ann Arbor, where I was previously. So a lot of universities do safety presentations on the whole when students come to campuses. So that's one of my first tips, is to go and go to that, and to send parents too as well, because that's really important. And then in terms of being in a city versus being in a small town, I think it's mostly about just keeping your wits about you, using, common sense. So for example, I tend to carry my cell phone. I just came back from 3 weeks in the Midwest. I carried my phone in my back pocket the whole time I was there, never had to worry about it. Now that I am back here this morning, I had to take it out of my back pocket and put it back on the front of me. So it's really just about, being street smart and, using the resources that are prevalent on college campuses, because it's going to vary widely from campus to campus what those resources are. In particular, at Penn, we have night walk teams that'll walk students places. We're a blue light campus. So I would encourage students, if you know that they are going to a larger city that they're not as familiar with, see if you have those young alums like Lisa was talking about, or reach out to your territory rep there, and they would probably be more than willing to sit down with your student and talk to you a little bit about the basics of their particular campus and what their offerings are.
Mhm. Yeah, I think definitely talking about campus safety is such a great way to answer that question too. Like, I think the vast majority of campuses have a program like that, right? Where there's either free rides home from the library if it's late at night, or there's a free service to walk you back to your dorm, right? Most campuses today have various types of safety services built in. So I think assuring students in that way. We will hold up, and if there's any last questions, I do want to share one more slide with you all before we leave, which is join us for our future learning labs. So we do have 2 additional learning labs happening this fall, one in September and one in October. So the one next month is on working with National College Access Partners. So this will cover working with different organizations like QuestBridge or College Horizons, programs that are there to help support your students as they're applying to college and why you might want to engage with them. And then we'll also host a session in October on financial aid. This will specifically talk about small business and farming scenarios and how you can help your students navigate that when they're filling out the FAFSA. They'll also discuss the recent changes to the FAFSA for this upcoming year. So we hope to see you at those sessions as well. And lastly, you are always welcome to join the NACAC Rural and Small Town SIG. If you are not already a member, you can scan this QR code or use the link. I'll throw it in the chat. It is a free resource open to everyone. You don't have to be a member of NACAC in order to join. So if you're not a member already and you'd like to, we'd certainly love to have you join our community and stay engaged with us for future events. That being said, I know we're a few minutes over, so if you need to hop off, thank you for being here, and we hope to see you in the future. For those of you still around, there is one more question in the chat if any of our panelists want to answer it before we wrap up.
I'm actually going to jump back onto Catherine's question also, and then I am happy to answer Jen's question too. One of the other things that I often utilized with my students when I was in Georgia was looking at query reports as well, to understand what does safety mean on a particular campus and what kinds of incidences there might be, so you can unpack that a little bit more with students. Also too, I think really kind of digging into what is the idea of safety and what does that mean to a student also is really important. We talk about that. I live in Poughkeepsie, which is a majority minority city. And so we often have the conversation about safe for whom. And so really kind of understanding what that means, what that looks like, and how you can kind of address some of those larger issues with students as well. As to Jen's question, and I can say this from Vassar's standpoint, at least, that we are happy to do workshops of all types. And so I'm, working with high schools and CBO partners. I've done everything from, over 100 students down to, I did one for a CBO in Manhattan last week that was just me and 3 students. And that ended up being a really lovely time. And so absolutely feel free to reach out. And I'm sure that's probably true for Suzannah and others as well, that we're always happy to support.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sometimes even getting an invitation to do a panel or a presentation is more leverage that one can use, because sometimes visits are more limited, and especially at the time of year that a visit has to happen, but panels and presentations can happen year round, and so those are a little easier to get up the chain.
Totally. Well, thank you both for sharing your thoughts on that. I'm seeing one more chat here. Let's see. All right. So with that, we'll go ahead and end the session. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and we hope to see you at future learning labs. And otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your day. So bye.